There was a moment from the funeral, Bush 43, he's greeting the presidents. He hands Michelle Obama a piece of candy, which is something that he did at John McCain's funeral. Such a small moment, but it really, that camaraderie stands in such contrast to what we saw with President Trump.
It absolutely does. And 43 and Michelle just adore each other. They're cute together all the time.
Yeah, they are.
They do photographs and they have a genuine affection for each other. And so that was obviously a preordained thing that I'll give you a candy again.
What do you make of that friendship, that unlikely friendship?
That it's a little flirtatious and a little bit of the feeling that I think it must be refreshing for Michelle Obama not to dislike a president that's a Republican, and her disdain for Donald Trump is legendary. Her memoir just came out, when she says, I'll never forgive Donald Trump, yet for my kids' safety, yet her heart is very open to George W. Bush.
I also think some of that's on purpose, too. Bush 43 wants to show that there's bipartisanship and that Republicans and Democrats can get along. I think, not that those photos are staged, but I think like the photo of Michelle Obama and Bush 43 at the Smithsonian African American Museum, I don't think that's by accident that you're seeing them together, hugging, laughing. I think it's a message to the country of unity, and I think it's important.
That they're mutually projecting a message.
And George W. Bush said the criticism that stung him the most was people during Katrina that said he was racist, that he didn't help African Americans. He has no racism in him, George W. Bush. And that fact is that he was, whether, his friends of Colin Powell, Condoleezza Rice, Michelle Obama, he's very conscious of wanting to embrace our first African-American president and, the First Lady.
So one line that I think stood out to everyone was when George W. Bush said in his eulogy that his father, quote, showed him what it means to be a president who serves with integrity and leads with courage. What did you think of that?
Well, I mean, Bush 41 really is from another era, and he didn't like to have the word legacy even used around him because it connoted
Talk about that, because you interviewed him to this point.
Well, I was working on a book about vice presidents, and I had asked about his greatest accomplishment during his 8 years as vice president under Ronald Reagan, and he just really didn't answer the question at all. He said history will judge, and I'm sure that Doug isn't surprised by this. He does not, he deflects, and he kind of went into an anecdote about Ronald Reagan. That was really endearing. He didn't want that attention, and that is so very rare now.
It's unusual because you normally have presidents who will write a biography and they're so conscious of their legacies.
Well, he did not do the big memoir. He co-wrote a book with Brent Scowcroft about the transformation of the world and dealing with Baghdad and Berlin and the like, but it wasn't a memoir.
It wasn't about him.
It wasn't about him. He's deeply self-effacing. In fact, he told journalists, you can't write about me because you were there. Legacies for people long time down the line. And a lot of former presidents like that 25-year rule, like nobody will know until we get documents released, Freedom of Information Act. So don't rank me, judge me too soon because there's always a chance to rise. Harry Truman went from a 27% approval rating to his ranked number 5 as president, and George W. Bush and Bush 41 have chances of rising in the legacy factor, even though reporters sometimes can be skeptical of that.
What is the legacy for George H.W. Bush?
I think it's kindness, really. I mean, because he was, so I talked to members of the White House resident staff, and he was just a supremely kind person. He would treat a maid or a butler as well as he would a head of state. He would call them and tell them to go home to their families after 7 o'clock at night. What are you still doing here? There are little things like that that I think speak to his character. They're important.
What about you?
The fact that he was the father of George W. Bush, that there were 2 Bushes as president. He used to call his son Quincy for John Quincy Adams.
The only other father-son team, right?
And then the big thing, we all have said World War II, the greatest generation, that combat service, but really he was one of the great Cold Warriors. He modeled himself a little bit after Eisenhower, but beyond that, it was about people like George Kennan and Chip Bolin and William Casey and others, insider intelligence gathering. How to win the Cold War was his life, and lo and behold, in 1991, he was president when the Soviet Union collapsed.
And the wall came down.
And the wall came down. Ronald Reagan said, tear down the wall, but it was Bush that got the wall down.
And that will be part of his legacy. Thank you so much for your reflections, both of you. I really appreciate it.